On another Friday night, I arrived home late, but my wife came back even later. I wasn't thrilled about her spending time with her friends after work, but I recognized the importance of couples having individual pursuits. Victoria was thoughtful enough to inform me whenever she went out, sharing where she was going, and she always made an effort to return home early. Typically, she was back by 8 p.m. this afternoon. While I was on a job inspection, I received a text from Vicky saying she was out with her friends for drinks and would be home late. Vicky doesn't go out often, maybe once every 3 to 4 weeks, but it still bothers me. The truth is, I have trust issues with people who spend time in bars or take frequent business trips, regardless of gender. Vicky does both, but the trips bother me the most. You might wonder why I have these issues and how they affect my view of Vicky. Let me share a brief, sad story to help you understand. I grew up in a bar, quite literally. My parents owned and ran the most popular bar in our small town near St. Louis, Missouri. They also ran an upscale French restaurant in the same building as the bar. People would come from far and wide to dine at the restaurant and then head next door to the bar, nightclub to dance and have fun. I witnessed everything, and from a young age, my parents instilled in me the importance of discretion. It was the summer I was 16, and they decided I needed to learn the business. My older brother and sister had both began working in the business when they were 16 also. My mom or dad had to interrupt me multiple times at the door dividing the bar from the restaurant to remind me to return to my restaurant duties. That night, my sister was on duty too. She approached me and warned, "Donnie, you need to focus on your job and not pay attention to anything else or you'll get into trouble." I turned to her and said, "But sis, that's Mrs. Horton, and she's out with a man. She doesn't even have on any underwear either. Do you think Mr. Horton knows? God, I can't wait to tell the guys. This is awesome." Sarah seemed frightened and glanced nervously over her shoulder before muttering, "Oh no." At that moment, I felt my dad's large hand grip my shoulder firmly. He squeezed it tightly and instructed, "Don, come with me right now." Once inside the office, he gestured for me to close the door and take a seat. I thought to myself, uh-oh, this can't be good. I felt queasy as I watched my father's stern expression. Eventually, he let out a sigh and began speaking. "Don, I should have talked to you about this before you started working here, but I didn't. I've had the same conversation with your brother and sister, and let me tell you, it never gets any easier." "Mrs. Horton is quite a stunning woman, isn't she, son?" my dad inquired. I was taken aback by his question and felt a bit lightheaded. I wondered where he was going with this and why he was changing the subject. As I tried to gather my thoughts to respond, he repeated, "Isn't she?" I nodded silently, murmuring, "Yeah." Leaning forward on his desk, my dad intertwined his fingers and rested his chin on his thumbs. I can still vividly recall the sorrowful expression on his face. Eventually, he leaned back in his chair and resumed speaking. Even after 20 years, I can still hear his words echoing in my mind. He said, "Son, this business is our bread and butter. It supports our entire family, provides for our comfortable home and amenities like the pool. It sent your brother to college, and it'll do the same for your sister and you. It'll take care of all of us for years to come, as long as we don't do anything to jeopardize it. Don, here's what you need to remember. When familiar faces come in with their families, greet them warmly. If they bring someone unknown, just call them sir or ma'am, unless instructed otherwise. What's crucial in this business is discretion. Ignore things that aren't your concern and forget any indiscretions you might witness. Discussing customer behavior outside this place is strictly off limits. If I find out anyone's gossiping, they're fired. We've lost good employees over this, but our reputation for privacy is as vital as our food and service quality. Understand this, son. Secrets like Mrs. Horton's tend to come out, and it usually ends badly, especially if there are children involved. So, head back to work, and remember to maintain discretion." Throughout high school and college, as I worked at the restaurant, I saw plenty of cheating, but never spread rumors. I learned a great deal about human nature and the consequences of actions, observing how late nights often indicated troubled marriages. This influenced my perspective on trust and relationships. During college, I met and fell in love with Victoria, a new waitress. We realized we were soulmates and planned a future together. We laughed at the cheaters who came to the business, knowing we'd be together for life. However, our parents insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect family assets, which made us ensure that anything we owned before or inherited after marriage remained ours alone, with clear guidelines for joint assets and child custody arrangements if needed. This precaution was intended to safeguard our individual contributions while allowing us to build our life together responsibly. Vicky and I thought it was silly because we knew we were meant to be together. To my surprise, Vicky's parents wanted the same. They had a large estate and didn't want Vicky's potential share to be split if we divorced. The agreement we came up with solved these issues. Anything we owned before marriage or inherited would stay with us in case of divorce. It also covered pensions. We each kept our own. The only things we'd split were assets acquired jointly after marriage. It even addressed child custody in case of divorce with minor children. If one of us traveled more, the children would stay with the less traveling parent unless it was unsafe for them. Graduation day finally came. Vicky got her bachelor's in finance and snagged a great job at a local stock brokerage. I graduated with a degree in construction management and a minor in landscape architecture. After college, I worked for a construction company for 2 years to learn the ropes. Vicky and I weren't interested in running the family restaurant and bar, so we left it to my siblings while my parents managed the corporate side. After 2 years with another company, I started my own construction and landscaping business. Since Vicky and I could barely afford our home and cars, my parents provided the capital for the business from the family corporation. I received a salary to manage it. Vicky's job was progressing too. She moved into a compliance role ensuring satellite offices adhered to regulations, which required her to travel a few days each month. This made me a bit uneasy because of my own experiences. As time went on, my business grew. I went from small remodeling jobs to building entire new buildings and landscaping them. I was content with the setup, so I never tried to take the business out of the corporation and put it in my name. I just kept earning a larger salary. I was proud that the business's value and our income increased every year. I learned to accept Vicky's travel, but I was never completely comfortable with it. I was fine with her occasional girls' nights out, though. She went maybe once a month and was usually home by 8 p.m. Sometimes I traveled for work too, or went out for a beer with my construction crews or office staff after work. That was just good management, but I made sure to limit it to a beer or two, and always got home no more than an hour later than usual, unless Vicky joined me. A few years into our marriage, we decided to start a family, welcoming our son Patrick and then our daughter Suzanne 18 months later. Vicky became the problem solver at work, often traveling more, sometimes up to 2 weeks a month. We both struggled with the travel, but she believed she'd be leading her department soon, which would reduce her travel and come with a raise. We agreed to keep things going as they were until she could achieve that. When the economy slowed down, my small business had to start taking on smaller jobs we would have previously ignored, especially after the housing bubble burst and the stock market tanked. We had to lay off about half our staff. We weren't drowning in debt, but we definitely weren't making as much money as before. One of these small jobs I reluctantly took on marked the beginning of the end for my marriage. In hindsight, I wish I had never taken it. Maybe things would have been different. I dragged myself to the office one Thursday morning, wondering why I even bothered since I had stayed late the previous night and finished all my paperwork. Vicky had been away all week on a compliance review, not expected back until late Friday, so I figured I might as well get some work done. I almost headed out to supervise our job sites directly because, as you might know, showing up on site really keeps the crew sharp and ensures good work. But I had barely started my day when my assistant told me Mrs. Sloan was here to talk about adding a deck and landscaping her backyard. I wasn't thrilled, just a deck and some bushes, but I met with her anyway, thinking at least it would keep the crew busy for a few days. When Mrs. Sloan walked in, I was stunned. She reminded me so much of Mrs. Horton, my first crush, that I was momentarily speechless. I managed to pull myself together and stood up to greet her. I smiled and said, "Mrs. Sloan, I'm glad to meet you. I'm Don Patterson. Mrs. Simpson mentioned you wanted a deck built. Is that correct?" "Excuse me," I said. "Please take a seat while we discuss what you need. I'm not usually like this, but you remind me so much of someone I knew when I was younger. It's almost like she just walked into the room. Please forgive me." Mrs. Sloan chuckled and then said, "Don, it's Jasmine." She must have noticed the confusion on my face because she continued, "You know, Jasmine Horton, Danita and Alfred Horton were my parents. We used to come to your family's restaurant all the time." Oh my God, I exclaimed. I'm sorry, you were much younger and you've changed. Jasmine let out a laugh, a charming and melodic sound, then said, Well, I guess we've all changed a bit. I was only 10 when my parents divorced, and my mom and I couldn't afford your prices after that. With a sigh, Jasmine continued, Anyway, my husband and I bought a house near where we used to live, and he says we can build a deck, a cabana with a hot tub, and maybe even do some landscaping if the prices aren't too high. When I found out you had a construction business, I just had to see if you would be interested before checking with anyone else. We spent most of the morning reminiscing about old times and discussing what Jasmine and her husband had in mind. Once we had a general idea of what she wanted, I told her I would need to see the house and take measurements before making a bid. No problem, Don, she said. We can go out now, or any time works for me since I don't work. Tell you what, I suggested. Why don't I swing by around 1 this afternoon? I need to check on my work crews, grab some lunch, and then I'll have all afternoon to take measurements and put together a bid. Does that work for you? Jasmine left the office, and I followed. I informed Laura, my secretary. I'll be out for the rest of the day. I'm going to check on all the job sites, grab some lunch, and then head over to Mrs. Sloane's to bid on her project. Just close up when you leave. If you need me, I'll have my cell. Things were going smoothly at the job sites, but I ended up staying longer than planned to chat with one of the property owners. This made me late for lunch, and I didn't arrive at the Sloanes until about 1:30. Jasmine greeted me at the door, and the first thing I did was apologize for my tardiness. Mrs. Sloane, I'm sorry for being late. I got held up with one of the property owners and ran over. I tried to call, but I only got the answering machine. Mrs. Sloane giggled and replied, Don, I told you it's Jasmine. No worries about being late. I didn't hear the phone. I was out cleaning the pool when you called. It's no big deal. You're here now. Do you want something to drink? Or should we head out and look at the area? I'm good, Jasmine. Let's go out and check out your backyard, I said as I grabbed my measuring tools. After taking all the measurements, I added, It's no trouble pricing everything I typically use, but since you don't have the hot tub yet, you'll need to get its dimensions before I can order some of the materials we'll need. Oh, Jasmine said. I thought you would provide the tub too. I don't know much about them and, well, can't you just include that in the bid too? I chuckled and replied, Sure, Jasmine, I suppose I can do that, but we don't sell them, so I'll have to purchase one elsewhere. To do that, I'll need to know the size you want, whether it'll be in-ground or standalone, and whether it'll run on 210 or 110 volt current. Jasmine looked really upset, and my heart went out to her. I remembered how she could get so sad over little things when she was younger. Finally, I suggested, Well, let's discuss this a bit, and maybe you could talk to your husband about it tonight. I can hold off on this until you decide what kind of tub you want. Now, Jasmine seemed even more worried. She was almost trembling as she said, Oh no, I can't call him about this. He told me to handle it, and I intend to do just that. He's on a business trip to Denver, so I won't see him until this weekend. Maybe we can figure it out together? I asked Jasmine more about how they'd used the tub and learned that they entertained rarely. And mostly she used the pool and backyard. Sometimes she had a friend or two over. Finally, I had enough information. We visited my supplier, and Jasmine decided on a smaller 5-person tub. After getting the dimensions, we returned to her home. I asked if she had a place where I could connect to the internet to access my office. Some of the items I needed for the estimate changed on Thursdays, and I wanted the accurate price list before I began working. Jasmine smiled and said, Sure, Don. Why don't you come into the office? Steve is a manufacturer's representative for Savin Business Systems. He has a really nice office set up so he can work from home when he isn't on the road. You can hook your laptop up to our net portal or you can use our computer, either one. I stepped into the office and was amazed. It was almost like a regular business office in a building. His desk was on the left of the door, facing the room, with windows overlooking the backyard. There were 2 comfy leather chairs in front of the desk and a bookshelf opposite. I was impressed. Jasmine walked behind the desk, pulled out the chair, and said, You can sit here while you work. If you need anything, just let me know. Thank you, I said as I sat down behind the desk. I placed my laptop on it and prepared to plug in the DSL cord. As I reached for it, I noticed a picture. I glanced at it, then stopped. I hesitated, staring at it before finally picking it up. Confused, Jasmine held out the cord and asked, Don, is something wrong? That's my husband and his pride and joy. I keep telling him to replace that picture with one of his Chevelle, but he refuses. I'm tired of looking at his old girlfriend every time I use the desk. Don? Don't look at me like that. What's wrong? Jasmine asked again. I carefully set the picture down and leaned back from the desk. I looked at Jasmine and said, "Did you say your husband was in Denver?" She seemed surprised and replied, "Yes, I did. Why?" "My wife's been in Denver all week, too." "Jasmine, did you ask Stephen where to get an estimate, or did you tell him you were going to talk to me?" "No, Don. Why does that matter?" "He just said if I needed a deck and hot tub to get estimates. He said if it didn't cost over $20,000, I could go for it. Why are you asking all this?" "Jasmine, the woman in this picture with Steve is my wife." Jasmine smiled and said, "Oh, how weird. You married Steve's old girlfriend?" "We've only been married for 18 months. When did you get married?" My stomach churned, and I looked back at Jasmine. "Vicky and I have been married for 9 years now. That picture was taken no more than 2 years ago because she's wearing a necklace I gave her for Christmas just over 2 years ago. She got the outfit she's wearing for a vacation the next summer." Jasmine paused, then said, "Don, I'm sorry if you're saying what I think you are, but why are you worried that she's in Denver?" "Jasmine, you said you've been married for 18 months. Do you know when this picture was taken? From what I remember of Vicky's outfit, it could have been around the time you got married. When did Steve have it framed?" "He said, but that can't be right because the picture was taken the day he won first prize in the big state Chevrolet car show. That was..." Jasmine began to cry and sank into one of the chairs in front of the desk. She continued softly, "That was 3 weeks before we got married. I just never thought, he said it was an old picture, but he's holding the first place trophy." "Damn him, Jasmine, wait," Don interrupted. "Let's think this through. I saw it all while I worked in the restaurant. I learned to ignore and not talk about other people's business because cheaters always get caught in the end. It looks bad, but all we know right now is that Steve and Vicky are standing in front of his car with their arms around each other. We also know the picture was taken about 18 months to 2 years ago. You're younger than us, so I don't think Steve could be an old boyfriend of Vicky's because we started dating when we were 18 and working in Dad's restaurant. But he could be. I don't know everyone she had a crush on when she was younger, just like you probably don't know everyone Steve did. How old is he anyway?" He's 29 and I'm 27. Well, that could work since Vicky's not yet 31. I just don't know. Darn, what should we do now? If we ask them, they'll likely deny it, whether they're having an affair or not. If they are, asking might make things worse. I feel like I should ask, but until today, I trusted Vicky completely. Darn, I'm just not sure. We talked more and came up with a plan we thought was okay. We agreed not to mention what we found out today. Jasmine wouldn't tell Steve about talking to me about the deck, and we'd hire a private investigator to check on Vicky and Steve. The next day, Jasmine and I talked to the security company we use for our construction sites, and they referred us to the investigation firm they use. We talked to their people, signed a contract for their services, and each gave them a check for our share of the retainer. Jasmine made the name on the check shorter, so if Steve asked, she could say it was a deposit for the work we discussed. I used the business account. Vicky never saw those books or checks, so I was safe. I'd just have to repay the business. After 3 weeks, Jasmine and I met with the investigator. He said, "Don, Jasmine, I'm sorry. No, that's not right. I'm glad to report that we couldn't find anything to suggest your spouses are involved with each other. We followed them every lunch hour and after work, and they didn't do anything they shouldn't have. The only unusual thing was last Friday, when Mrs. Patterson and some of her coworkers went out after work. They were at several bars at St. Louis Landing and danced with several men each. Vicky did dance with Steve once, but it was appropriate. They kept their distance and didn't touch inappropriately. There was no kissing or anything else wrong. They didn't talk to each other after the dance." I let out a sigh and leaned back in my chair, glancing at the investigator and then at Jasmine. I was starting to think that maybe my distrust, which I learned from working in the family business, was causing all this mess. We had checked phone records, installed cameras and recorders in the house, and even in Vicky's car and purse. But everything was clean. Finally, I sighed again and said, "Well, I guess we can chalk this up to paranoia then. I'm relieved to find out, but I'm embarrassed that I even suspected Vicky and Steve. We can stop the..." Wait a minute. Jasmine, didn't you mention Steve's trip to San Antonio next week? Jasmine looked puzzled and replied, "Yes, but what does that have to do with..." "Oh, we won't need to follow them next week, will we?" "I think that's exactly when we need to follow them. 2 weeks ago, Vicky told me she had a compliance review next week. I don't recall exactly where she said she was going, but I think it was Austin, Texas. Depending on where they stay, they could be just an hour apart. We've established they don't meet around here, so we should check this trip. If they come up clean, then I'll admit I was just being paranoid, despite that picture. It's reasonable to think if they were old friends, Vicky would let him take a picture with her and his trophy. Throughout all the uncertainty and investigation, Don and Jasmine couldn't find any sign that Vicky or Steve treated them differently. They were the same as always. Don couldn't identify any way Vicky had changed since they were dating or early in their marriage. She treated him like he was the only man in the world. They had closeness, and she was as loving and considerate as ever. On the Friday night before Vicky's trip, Don and she went out for dinner on a date night. Later, while they were snuggled in bed, Don asked, "Vicky, do you remember when we worked at Dad's restaurant, and we used to laugh at all the cheaters and people who did inappropriate things?" Don thought he felt a slight tension in Vicky's muscles, but he wasn't sure. She smiled and turned her face toward him, asking, "Yes, some of those people were really dumb. Sometimes, when someone at work does something like that, I think back to those days and wonder how stupid they are." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, there's a guy at work who thinks his wife is cheating on him, but he hasn't found any evidence. When he shared his worries with me, it reminded me of those days, so I advised him to stay calm. I told him if she's cheating, he should stay observant because cheaters usually get caught eventually. I also mentioned that the longer it takes for him to find out, the better it might be for his kids, as divorces are tough on them." Vicky seemed a bit down when she responded, "Why assume it'll automatically lead to divorce? Maybe the wife still loves her husband and the affair doesn't mean much to her. Perhaps she doesn't want a divorce." "Oh, no, Vicky, he's just like me. He's seen the scene in bars and has zero tolerance for cheating, just like us. I can't imagine him accepting a long-term affair any more than we would. Maybe he could handle a one-night stand, but definitely not an affair." Vicky tensed up when Don mentioned not accepting a long-term affair, but she smiled and kissed him gently. "I'm glad you're still the man I married. We've both seen how damaging blatant affairs can be. If he needs help, bring him over and maybe we can support him through it. Good night, honey." Don and Vicky settled into bed, but they didn't fall asleep quickly, judging by their tossing and turning. The following week was tough for Don. He called the investigators twice for updates, but all he got was, "Our team is following them and we'll have a report next Monday." Finally, Monday arrived and Don met with Jasmine at the investigator's office. The atmosphere suggested bad news. The investigator leaned back and said, "When you wanted us to tail your spouses last week, I almost said it'd be a waste. This was one of our toughest cases. But you were right. Steve and Vicky are having an affair. We've got pictures and recordings to prove it." I'm shocked. If we'd stopped after tracking them locally, we'd never have known. They only meet a few times a year in distant cities, acting like chance encounters, being very cautious. We discovered a couple of clever cheaters. They went to different towns and stayed in separate hotels. Surprisingly, they met up in a third hotel but didn't stay in the same room. They each rented their own rooms at different times, but these rooms had a connecting door. Steve paid for his room in cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. Vicky used a credit card under the name Angela Foster, her maiden name, with an address in Washington, Missouri. She also had a state ID card as Angela Foster. Steve used his middle name, Allen, when registering. They only rented these rooms on Tuesday and Thursday nights, didn't stay the whole night, and only met on those 2 days. I leaned back and pondered. Foster was Vicky's maiden name. Victoria Angela Foster. Jasmine nodded. Allen is Steve's middle name. Well, I sighed. I guess it's pretty much over. I'll be scheduling a meeting with a divorce lawyer soon. Before Jasmine could respond, the investigator interjected. Hold on. There's more. I usually wouldn't bring this up, but in this case, something feels off. Despite evidence of act, it doesn't quite seem like a typical affair. It's like they were playing a game. We have hours of recorded conversations, mostly harmless. There were only 2 instances of intercourse during the entire week, and the pillow talk was unusual. Let me play you a clip to illustrate. The investigator played the tape, and we heard Vicky speaking. "You know, Steve, I'm starting to think we should end this. We've been getting away with it for 6 years now and had our fun. We've proven we're clever cheaters, but even you must admit the closeness isn't as good as with our spouses. Besides, something Don said on Friday bothered me. He reminded me about what we learned at his parents' restaurant, that cheaters eventually get caught. No one covers every angle. Sooner or later, overconfidence or a small mistake trips them up. I'm still worried about Denver. It was the first time we went to the same town, and I think it was a mistake. We should have stuck to the original plan, meeting in different nearby towns. I know it's a pain having to book 2 rooms and pay for one we don't use, but I believe we've proven our point. We're smart cheaters, and if you play it smart, you can cheat and succeed. Losing Don is the last thing I want. I love him more than anything. He's the best man I've ever known. After the first few times we got together, the only thrill I got was from the planning and scheming. I can spend hours strategizing and setting up deceptions. Getting the IDs, making reservations, and arranging travel. It's like solving a puzzle. The closeness just doesn't excite me anymore. And don't give me that macho attitude. I know for a fact you feel the same way. You admitted in Denver that you always went back to your hotel, feeling unsatisfied. The investigator paused the recording and spoke again. There's more, but this was the most puzzling part of their conversations. I just can't understand why. He halted abruptly, looking at Don, who burst into laughter. Once he calmed down, Don explained, I'm sorry. I know this isn't funny and I'm furious, but there's something about that conversation you need to know. Years ago, a couple we knew got divorced because the wife was cheating. She had been having an affair for almost 4 years before getting caught, all because of a simple mistake. That night, we discussed cheating and the mistakes cheaters make, recalling what my dad used to say when we worked at the restaurant. Vicky kept insisting that smart cheaters could get away with it. I argued the opposite, saying cheaters always get caught eventually, even if it takes years. We agreed to disagree, but Vicky kept bringing up the idea of smart cheaters winning. And as far as I remember, her affair with Steve started around the time of that argument. Vicky's always been proud of her intelligence, and now I realize I might have triggered something when we talked about that affair. She was trying to prove she could do it and get away with it. Maybe she could have if she'd ended it sooner. But now, nope, she's not getting away with it. Don and Jasmine met again, this time waiting for their appointment with the divorce attorney. Since splitting the investigators' costs went smoothly, they decided to share a divorce attorney too. When Don was called into the office, the attorney seemed surprised. Mr. Patterson, and this is Mrs. Patterson? He asked. Don chuckled and clarified, No, sir, not quite. I'm Don Patterson, and this is Jasmine Sloan. We found out her husband and my wife were cheating with each other, so we split the bill for an investigator to gather evidence. Now we thought we might also split your fee. Attorney George Spaulding smiled and invited them to sit while they discussed matters. Don handed over a copy of the investigator's report and pictures. Before the attorney could review them, Don explained, I don't think my case will be too complicated. I brought a list of everything Vicky and I own, along with when and how we acquired it. I also have our prenuptial agreement detailing property division and custody. I just want a divorce for adultery and settlement as per the prenup. Jasmine's situation might be a bit trickier. Don passed his attorney the paperwork supporting his divorce case and waited for him to review it. Then Jasmine handed over similar documents for her situation, lacking a prenuptial agreement. The attorney outlined the divorce process, time frame, and fees to the two friends. He discussed Jasmine's desired outcome if achievable. Finally, he said, I believe I have enough for now. I'll need to examine all the documentation and the investigator's report. If I have any questions, I'll reach out. Otherwise, I'll prepare the documents and proceed. Would you prefer I serve the papers directly or contact you first? Both Don and Jasmine preferred to be notified when the papers were ready for serving. They left the office, agreeing to stay in touch as they managed their affairs. 2 days later, Don received a call from George Spaulding. After exchanging greetings, George expressed his astonishment at the case. Don, I've gone through everything you provided, and I have to say, this is the most bizarre situation I've ever come across. I even had my partners take a look, and they're in agreement. While there's no denying the infidelity, it seems clear to me that the woman still loves you. It's almost like this wasn't even an affair, more like a game they felt compelled to play. Are you absolutely certain about proceeding with the divorce? From what you've described, your marriage seemed near perfect. No arguments, a healthy bed life, mutual love and respect. Don, pardon my frankness, but it almost seems like you're playing along too. It's as if it's your move now, and divorce is the only option left. Can't you sit down with Vicky and work through this? I've heard the tapes, and she's told Steve they should stop, that it was all just a game to her. Don pondered for a moment before responding to George. No, George, I've asked myself that same question, and there was a time when I thought I could. If this had just been a game without any physical intimacy, if it had been only an emotional affair, or better yet, just a pretend one, I might have been able to forgive. Initially, maybe it was Vicky's frustration after I challenged her belief in the possibility of smart cheaters. She couldn't accept my belief that cheaters always get caught eventually. But once she crossed that line and allowed Steve into her bed, I couldn't overlook her betrayal. This has been going on for too long, 6 years. Even if the closeness wasn't satisfying and they didn't enjoy it as much as with Jasmine and me, it still counts as adultery. And she needs to face the consequences. George sighed, understanding Don's resolve. Well, it's your decision. I'm just sorry you're going through this. I have the papers ready for filing. When would you like her to be served? Don grinned, a sense of determination in his voice. Well, George, she and Steve are on the East Coast this week. She's due back late Friday afternoon. Can we arrange for her to be served at her workplace on Friday? Her flight lands around noon, so she should be in her office by 3:30 or 4. I want her to receive the papers along with the tape I've prepared. It contains her conversation with Steve about quitting. You're welcome to listen, but at the end, I make it clear. You lose. Like I said, cheaters always slip up and get caught. On Friday morning, Don gathered his crews in his office before they headed out. He explained the situation and why he and Vicky were divorcing. He instructed them not to take orders from her and to keep any business or personal matters to themselves. As they left, Laura, his secretary, expressed her sympathy. Oh, Don, I'm so sorry. It's hard to believe Vicky would do something like this, especially considering how she despises cheaters. Laura chuckled and added, I mean, the things she used to say when we spotted someone we knew doing stuff like that? Whoa. At 4:10 that afternoon, Don received a call from the attorney confirming that the papers had been served. Around 4:30, the phone rang again, and Don could see it was Vicky calling. Don answered, Hello, Vicky. Amid sobs, Vicky's voice quivered weakly. Don, please, can't we move past this? You know I love you more than anything. I realize how foolish I was, but you really got under my skin that night with your superior attitude, lecturing me about how a smart cheater could get away with it. Don, for the first year, it was all just a game to prove a point. You heard me tell Steve I didn't love him and that the closeness wasn't even good. We were going to stop. Please, Don, don't do this to us. I can't believe you actually found out after all these years. I'd love to know how you managed to do it. Vicky, I didn't cause this. You did. Now I have to end it. I thought we were on the same page about cheating and affairs. I believed we both shared the belief that cheaters would face the consequences eventually. I just can't understand how you could justify doing something like this, knowing how we both feel. Feeling a twinge of sympathy, Don decided to reveal how he uncovered the affair. Vicky, I wasn't planning on telling you how I found out, but I think I will now. You were partly correct about regretting going to Denver together. That Thursday before you returned, Jasmine Sloan visited the office. She wanted us to work on a deck and landscape her backyard. She allowed me to use Steve's office, and I noticed the picture of you with him and the trophy from the State Classic Chevrolet car show. She mentioned you were one of his exes. I almost bought that story until I realized the photo looked recent and you were wearing jewelry and clothes that I knew were only about 2 years old. I almost dismissed my suspicions, thinking maybe you two had dated before we got together and randomly bumped into each other at the car show. However, when Jasmine and I talked more and I found out you were both in Denver that week, we decided to hire a private investigator to follow you. We tracked both of you for the next month, and aside from one dance at a girls' night out, there was no contact between you. We were ready to drop the investigation and write it off as a coincidence until I remembered that Jasmine mentioned Steve would be in San Antonio while you said you'd be in Austin, so we decided to have you followed that week. If we hadn't found anything, we were planning to let it go. But as it turned out, we did find something, didn't we? Don could hear sniffles in the background before Vicky spoke. Don, I love you so much. I don't want to lose you. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me, just this once? With a sigh, Don responded, No, honey, I just can't. Not right now, at least. Maybe I could have if you hadn't slept with the guy, but I can't overlook that and the fact that you carried on the affair for so long. But, honey, don't you get it? It wasn't really an affair. It was more like a game. I just had to prove it could be done. And the closeness, well, it was just because we were away from home and got so damn horny. It was almost like we were using each other for release. We never made love or told each other we loved one another. It was all about the game, and then the last 4 years were just about getting some relief. Vicky, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you did it. You planned to cheat on me, and you did it. You had to arrange to meet Steve somewhere, and I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't during one of your girls' nights out. Was it? Vicky sighed and admitted, Yes, Don, it was. At the time, we were just chatting. He came up to our table and asked me to dance. We were discussing a couple we saw at the bar who were all over each other, and I made a comment about smart cheaters, or rather, the lack thereof. While we danced, I explained our beliefs to Steve. Before returning me to the table, he said, "You know, I bet we could pull that off. I travel a lot, and if I found someone else who did, we could meet in a different town far from home and cheat without getting caught." We danced a few more times that night and decided to give it a shot. I learned he traveled as a manufacturer's rep, and he found out about my compliance reviews. We realized we'd be in the same area about 3 weeks later, so we planned to meet. At that meeting, we started planning our, at the time, flawless, non-romantic affair. We agreed never to call each other at home or on our personal phones. We mostly used disposable phones and only called from work or lunch, and even then it was only to arrange the next meetings. We got fake IDs, and I obtained a new credit card sent to a P.O. box near my parents' home. You know how often I visit them, so I could check the box regularly. We covered all our tracks except for the photo. I had no idea he had taken one. Vicky let out a weak laugh and continued.
I guess it's true what they say. One small mistake can ruin everything for a cheater. I'm so sorry, honey. I guess I just got caught up in the excitement. I love you.
Don heard the click as Vicky ended the call. He was taken aback to find tears streaming down his face. He leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. He didn't even notice when Laura bid him goodnight. The next thing he knew, it was dark outside. Before the divorce was finalized, both sets of parents tried to dissuade Don from divorcing Vicky. Her parents, in particular, made a heartfelt plea. They called one Saturday and asked if they could visit him and the children at his house. Naturally, he agreed. After spending time with the kids, all 3 adults sat in pool chairs in the shade, watching the children swim. Vicky's mother turned to Don and said, "Don, we all know my daughter made a terrible mistake. When she first came to us that night, she was devastated. She could hardly speak. Eventually, she opened up and showed us all the evidence you had against her. Don, I have to admit, if I found out her father did what she did, I would have left him too. But can't you consider what I'm saying instead of just reacting the way I would? I know she loves you deeply. I see it every time she looks at you, talks about you, or sees your picture. Her problem is her intellectual pride. She's always been the smartest woman in the room, and she felt she had to prove she could get away with something like this. Don, did you ever think that maybe you played a part in driving her to this? She mentioned the argument you had about your friends just before she decided to have the affair." Don looked at his mother-in-law and said, "Yes, Mona, I've considered that I might have contributed to her affair. I thought if she had just met him and not slept with him, I could have forgiven her. You know how we both felt about cheaters before we got married. You know how strongly she felt about the clauses in the prenup regarding infidelity. And then she did something like this. No, I just can't let it go. It's tearing me apart, but I just can't." The divorce was finalized, and Don was relieved they had the prenuptial agreement. They had investments and jointly owned the house. Since his business was in the family name and the shares were considered gifts, Vicky didn't receive any part of it. Don allowed Vicky to take her share of the house's value from their investment account, so he could own it outright. Don always treated Vicky kindly whenever he saw her, and never caused any trouble when she visited the children. Although he still felt the urge to embrace her when he saw her, he knew he could never trust her again. One day, he took the children to the restaurant for dinner when Jasmine walked in. She seemed hesitant, standing in the doorway, unsure. The hostess approached her, asking about seating, and Jasmine signaled she needed a moment. Don noticed, and quickly got up from his chair. He intercepted the hostess and Jasmine before they reached her table. "Jasmine, it's great to see you," he greeted her. "I noticed you told Patty you were alone. If you'd like, I just have my kids with me. We could share a table." Jasmine glanced at Don, then smiled. He felt a surge of happiness, and the room seemed brighter. She approached him and gave him a brief hug and kiss on the cheek. "Thank you," she said. "I think I'd like that. I've been so lonely since—" After Jasmine was seated, Don introduced her to his children. Before she even opened the menu, his father appeared by the table. "Don, have you been keeping secrets from me? Who is this lovely lady?" he exclaimed. Don chuckled, and Jasmine grinned. Don turned to his father and said, "Dad, this is Jasmine Sloan. Her husband. Her mother was Donita Horton. They used to come here when I was a kid." Mr. Patterson smiled, recalling, "Oh yes, I remember you now. You resemble your mother so much I can't believe I didn't recognize you. How are your parents? I haven't seen them in years." Jasmine looked up at Mr. Patterson and replied, "They're both all right, I guess. I talk to Dad on the phone sometimes. After the divorce, he moved to Kansas City. I see Mom a couple times a month. She lives north of town. Well, enjoy your evening. Hopefully you'll visit more now that you've remembered where we are, Mr. Patterson said before leaving. Once Jasmine ordered, Dawn apologized. How have you been? I'm sorry I haven't called more, but summer's my busy season. Maybe I used that as an excuse, though. I could have made time. I'm sorry. Don't be silly, Jasmine reassured him. I know you're busy, and I didn't call you either. In fact, I'm here tonight to celebrate. Steve finally gave up, and my divorce was finalized today. We had to sell the house and split everything 50-50. He fought alimony and dragged out the divorce, but I eventually won. I had to rent a small apartment, but once I find a job, I'll get a better place. As the kids became increasingly restless, Dawn and Jasmine chatted and ordered another bottle of wine. Eventually, Dawn said to Jasmine, I guess I should go before these two troublemakers get me banned from here. It's been really nice talking to you again. Maybe we can do this again sometime? Jasmine smiled and nodded. She replied, I'd like that. Let's do it. She motioned for the waitress and asked for the check. The waitress informed them that both bills had already been settled. Dawn chuckled. That old guy, I usually pay and he knows it. I think he's trying to play matchmaker, he joked. After leaving a tip on the table, he stood up. Come on, kids. Say goodnight to your grandparents and let's head home. Dawn offered his arm to Jasmine as they left the table. May I escort you to your carriage, my lady? He quipped. Jasmine smiled, taking his arm. You may, good sir, she replied. While they waited for the kids to return, Dawn confessed to Jasmine, I really don't want this night to end. Before you arrived, I was hoping to get home in time to relax by the pool. All I had to look forward to was a night alone with the kids. Jasmine looked at Dawn and admitted, Me too. Except I don't have a pool at my apartment and I don't have any children. Jasmine, it's still early. Would you like to come over to our place and hang out some more after I put these two to bed? Dawn offered. Jasmine smiled and nodded eagerly. Yes, I'd like that very much, she whispered. Once the children were asleep, Dawn packed a cooler with drinks and ice. He set it between their pool chairs and invited Jasmine to take her pick. Dawn grabbed a Pepsi and settled back, inviting Jasmine to join him. As they gazed at the shimmering pool under the soft lights, Dawn turned to Jasmine with a sigh. I think your mother played a part in my divorce. Oh, damn, I'm sorry, Jasmine. I shouldn't have said that. I was just thinking. Jasmine looked at him with concern, and he thought he saw a tear in her eye. Dawn moved closer, wiping the tear away gently. Let me explain. I feel like a fool now, he said. When I was 16, I had just started working at the restaurant for about 3 weeks when your mother came in with a strange man. They had dinner, then went to the bar to drink and dance. I always thought your mother was the most beautiful woman in the world. Well, until I met you. Anyway, I couldn't stop staring at her, and my father not only noticed, but heard me saying I had to tell my friends about what I saw when we got to school on Monday. Wow, I still remember the scolding I got from my dad that night in his office. I think that talk shaped my views on marital loyalty till now. Funny thing, Vicky ended up working for us later and got the same talk. We used to chat a lot about our experiences at the restaurant. I thought we both agreed with my dad's take on fidelity. Maybe I was too stubborn about it, though. Seeing your mom that night made me stick to my rigid beliefs throughout this mess. I'm sorry. And no, nobody in my family or our staff spilled the beans about your mom. I have no idea who did. It was almost a year after that incident before your parents split. And as far as I know, that was the only time she and her guy were at the restaurant. Jasmine glanced at Dawn and remarked, Well, maybe something positive came out of that chaos. Or maybe not, depending on how you see it. Your mom ended up marrying that guy and they stayed together until he passed away in a car accident a few years ago. I'm not entirely sure, but I think she might have been cheating on him too. They say once a cheater, always a cheater. Once Dawn was sure Jasmine had stopped crying, he returned to his seat, and they shifted to lighter topics. He discovered she had a degree in accounting and had worked in that field for a while. He chuckled to himself, recalling his mom's complaints about needing more time off but being unable to, because she handled the books for the bar and restaurant and supervised the waitstaff. He also realized he needed to hire some assistants for Laura. Maybe. The following Wednesday, Dawn had barely arrived home from work when he heard loud banging on the front door. Opening it, he was met with something soft and heavy hitting his chest. Focusing his eyes, he saw a tearful Jasmine clinging to him, attempting to kiss him. Amidst her tears, she exclaimed, "Thank you. Oh, thank you. Your parents offered me a job. I went for the interview and they hired me. I start tomorrow. They're paying me way too much and—" Her voice trailed off as she broke down crying again, and Don simply held her close, gently stroking her hair. During the following months, Don and Jasmine grew increasingly close. Don started taking the kids to the restaurant for dinner 4 or 5 times a week, often making sure the bookkeeper accountant could join them. They spent Christmas together at the Pattersons, and both helped out at the bar's New Year's Eve party, much to the amusement of Don's family, who teased them about their constant hugging and kissing. By then, they were seen as a couple, and any invitation extended to one automatically included the other. Valentine's Day rolled around, another busy day for the restaurant and bar. Don and Jasmine were once again called upon to work. After the rush had died down, Don called Jasmine over to the bar. He asked her to join him on stage, pretending he needed her help with a microphone stand. Once there, he surprised her by getting down on one knee and asking her to marry him, holding out a small black box as he professed his love for her. Just as Jasmine's fingers touched the box, her mind deciphered what Don was saying. She closed her hands over the box and said, "What? Did you say?" Jasmine opened the small box and saw a gorgeous ring inside. She was stunned, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Slowly, she took the ring out and examined it, then slid it onto her left ring finger, tears streaming down her face. Overwhelmed with emotion, she dropped to her knees and kissed Don passionately, expressing her love and excitement for their future together. Cheers and congratulations filled the room as Jasmine came up for air and saw Don's family surrounding them. They hugged her and offered their best wishes, celebrating the happy couple's engagement. Jasmine and Don set a June wedding date, and in the months leading up to it, Jasmine gradually moved her belongings from her apartment to Don's home. During the reception, while opening gifts, they found a yellowed envelope at the bottom of the pile. Inside was a heart-shaped valentine with a faded signature with words, "I received this valentine from the only man I ever loved on our first Valentine's Day. I have treasured it ever since. Somehow it seems appropriate I pass it on to you now. Perhaps it is a symbolic passing on of his heart from me to you. May the rest of your life be filled with love and consideration for one another. May you never break the other's heart or let foolish pride tear you apart. Congratulations. I wish you both a life of love and happiness. With all my love, Victoria."